authenticity and truth in documentary is so important. Like that's what it is, and we should strive to tell the truth, or the version of truth that we have.
Ingezoomd. Radiomakers vertellen hun geheimen.
Ingezoomd.
So Dolby Digital, like a big cinema company, their kind of trademark sound is this bass drop, and it like goes boom, but it like moves through all these things. You feel like you're falling, like you have a physical response to that sound. Every time I hear it, I'm like, yes.
Dit is Hana Walker-Brown. Een jonge documentairemaakster uit Engeland met een passie voor sounddesign en muziek. Ik ben Marie de Broek en liep als radiomaker midden oktober rond op het Prix Europa Festival in Berlijn. Ik luisterde er naar The Spirit of Hazel Road, een documentaire van Hana Walker-Brown. Een jonge, pittige vrouw die er niet alleen uitziet alsof ze weet wat ze wil. Het stuk trok mezelf enorm hard aan door het inventief gebruik van audio en live muziek. Ik sprak haar erna aan voor een gesprek en vroeg haar wat voor bijzondere plek Hazel Road juist is.
Hazel Road is a working class community in Yorkshire in England. It's quite a forgotten part of England. It's very poor, and it's where most of the fishing trade happened in this country, between England and Iceland. And trawling ships was a very dangerous industry, and Hull lost 6,000 men in a century. They just disappeared, so they drowned. And the women of Hazel Road had kind of had enough, so they decided they were going to do something. And this is the story about what they did and how they got government to change the laws on ships, which ultimately saved kind of thousands of lives.
In The Spirit of Hazel Road vertelt Hana Walker-Brown over een vissersstad in Engeland, Hull. Er verdwenen over de jaren heen 6.000 mannen door de gevaren op zee tijdens de visvangst. De vrouwen van Hazel Road hadden genoeg van de aanwezigheid van de dood. Ze namen het heft in eigen handen om de wetten op de schepen te veranderen.
And how did you stumble upon Hazel Road?
So my dad has lived in Hull since I was 4. And so I was aware of Hazel Road. Hazel Road's quite infamous. There's a lot of characters on the road, good and bad. And I knew about this story, and it's funny because I've basically done 3 kind of sea stories and that have been here at this competition, and I don't know why I'm drawn to the sea, but this was kind of the third in those stories, and it actually was going to be a program about the folk music industry that was kind of born on that street as well. And then the more people I met, the more people talked about this story, and so I thought I'll tell this one.
Eerst had ze andere plannen met de verhalen van de inwoners van Hazel Road. Ze wou een portret maken over de volksmuziek die er gespeeld werd. Maar hoe meer ze met hen sprak, hoe meer het duidelijk werd dat het verhaal een andere wending zou nemen. Het werd een stuk over de moedige vrouwen van de Noordzeevissers. Maar de typische volksmuziek bleef wel de soundtrack.
What was important to me was to present a really authentic portrait of this place and the people without being, without saying this place is so amazing, just something that was very real. And this is just really happens. Like, they just get together and they play music all the time, like 4 or 5 times a week. This is what they do. And I think it gives a really different representation. And I think so often I hear music and stuff that's used really badly, and I think music should be just as important as the voices. So that's why they are kind of up front in this. But secondary to the women voices are more important.
So to go back to music in general, in your pieces, you always think about it very carefully.
I do, and I did music and sound design before I did radio, so I've always done music. And I think music is just as important in telling a story. I think it can ruin a story. If you put the wrong piece in, it can really change things. And I always think about how something feels rather than what it sounds like. So if I'm doing something with a haunted house, I wouldn't put in the sound of a ghost or, a creaky door. I'd want to put in kind of tones that make you uncomfortable or kind of higher pitch noises that are slightly eerie or brooding. So I guess I always think about radio as painting a picture, and I want the listener to have a cinematic experience where they can visualize it rather than just be told stuff. And I think music is so powerful in its ability to do that.
Hoe Hana haar muziek gebruikt is al schilderend. Zo omschrijft zij het zelf. De muziek geeft haar documentaires iets filmisch, waardoor we het ons kunnen visualiseren en zo het verhaal zo intens mogelijk beleven. Niet van op de achtergrond, maar werkelijk luisteren naar een menselijk verhaal dat gehoord wil worden.
You say it's like painting a picture, and you feel like if you paint, you feel like, oh, this should be there, and it's really, but it's with your hands, and it's really, you see it exactly what you do. How do you do that in your head?
I don't know. It's just this thing I do, and it's funny because when I do sound design, it starts with layers. So if you look at my session of a piece, it has 200 different streams going across, and it is a process of layering one thing then another, and it's just this weird thing because I'm not a very technical person. I'm not really in tune with technology or any of that, but just something happens and I just know kind of intuitively what to do, which I know is really unhelpful, but I don't know. I just think I want someone to be able to visualize this in color, in full form, rather than just kind of passively listen. And I guess just a rich experience. I want the richness in there for a listener. I want them to stop what they're doing to listen rather than just kind of have it on in the background. Especially because all the stories I do are humans, human stories, people that have been through something quite extraordinary but are just ordinary. There's nothing kind of remarkable about them except, what they've, or the courage that they have. And I think it's really important to have those stories and elevate them as much as you can. Because there's so much noise and there's so much crap, celebrity stuff. There's all this kind of bubble that people, hold in higher regard than actually people that are just like us that have overcome these things.
How do you recognize a subject that is worth it to make something about?
I think if it moves me, even if you have an idea of what you want to do, you can still go to that person and know that it's not right. I think you have to have a conversation with the person first, and all the things I've ever made have kind of come from either a chance encounter or a conversation, or I think you have to be very much in and amongst it rather than just kind of behind a computer researching, being like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. Because you don't know for sure until you are in there, like we are now, talking to someone. You don't know what's going to happen. I think you have a gut feeling about whether you should tell a story or not.
So you would not be afraid to stop something if you think
No.
okay, so this is not
No, I
worth
wouldn't.
it.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's ways that you can get around that by maybe this person then takes a minor role. But again, it's that thing of I wouldn't promise anyone anything until I knew for sure. So if I'm going to interview someone, it's under the guise of research for a project with the potential, but not this documentary is about you. So I think it's just the way you kind of frame those things that's really important.
So I have the feeling also the way you talk about sound design and music that it's really needs to come from within you, and it must feel organic.
Yeah, totally. And I think within that then it is authentic, and then when it's passed on to the ears of a listener, it feels authentic to them. It doesn't feel fake or forced or like you're trying to be someone or do something that isn't you. And I think authenticity and truth in documentary is so important. That's what it is, and we should strive to tell the truth, or the version of truth that we have. And so I think that's why I always do it myself, and I always make my own stuff, because I know that that that's what I can do. But then I totally value that some producers will go and get a sound designer to come in because they know that they can't do that themselves. And I think that's really admirable when you kind of, you collaborate to give the best, story you can.
Hana vertelde al verhalen over een gang in Londen, freediving, beatboxen en nog zoveel meer. Deze onderwerpen kwam ze tegen door een ontmoeting, een babbel, want daar begint het allemaal mee. Vanaf dan volgt ze haar buikgevoel. Is dit iets wat verteld moet worden? En hoe doe ik dat op de eerlijkste manier tegenover het personage?
I was wondering about a moral compass. You choose a subject, and sometimes it's a bit, how do you say it, controversial.
Yeah.
How do you decide what's right and what's wrong, and what can and what can't, what you can ask of someone?
I think you can make those judgments, in your gut, I think, if you have empathy, which you hope documentary makers do, because we're constantly drawing things out of people. I think when you've overstepped a mark. I also think it's removing yourself and any ego from the situation, because if you make it about you and about you having to make a thing, then the other person gets lost, whereas if you make it about presenting them in the most authentic way, then you can feel it. And I think it is just removing an ego, removing your role, and being a human being and not being a journalist. And I think that's a kind of difficult thing to straddle for a lot of people, because you have to get the story and you have to get it at this deadline and this is what happens. But I don't think people should be afraid to say, do you know what, actually, I don't, I think you constantly have to check in with those both sides, the journalist and the human, because if the human isn't happy, then the journalism probably isn't right. Do you know what I mean? So I think, you have to think about yourself as a person that feels and go with that gut feeling.
I heard in your piece you don't hear you, your voice. Is that a thing for you, that you're not in it, like you say, like you remove yourself?
Yeah, it is most of the time. I have narrated 2 of my things, only because I don't like using narrators that aren't there, because I think it's nice to have that reaction in the moment. So there are 2 things that I did use my voice, but no, I don't. It is a conscious decision not to, because I just kind of want to disappear into the walls. I want the listener to just kind of pass on that experience to them and allow them to make up their mind about the situation, rather than kind of interrupting. And a lot of the time I find narration myself, it takes me out of the moments that I have with whatever I'm listening to. And there's been a couple of pieces here where I wish the narrator had gone away, because I was so kind of invested, and then they'd come back in and they don't have a connection to the story in the same way that the producer had. And I don't know, I guess it's just personal. I don't like being told stuff that I can be told directly from the person. And so I just think they're kind of redundant. But I know, there are people that like the other way around. They like to be told everything. But I would rather, be allowed to get to know these people at my own time and in my own way. So yeah, I just like to kind of become the microphone and just offer what I have experienced.
Voor een oprechte documentaire is het noodzakelijk jezelf weg te cijferen uit de situatie, zegt Hana Walker-Brown. Het draait om je personages en niet om jou. Een goede interviewer heeft 2 kanten. De journalist en de mens. De journalist houdt rekening met deadlines en de mens is een empathisch wezen. Vaak is ze ook letterlijk niet te horen in het eindresultaat. Voor haar is de stem van een verteller enkel afleiding van de boodschap van het verhaal. Ik vroeg me af of ze zich bezig hield met wie er naar het stuk zal luisteren wanneer het af is.
The only person that I think about is the people that are in it. And I think, not because that kind of hinders me in what I want to say, because, I'll always tell the truth or what I've, is my experience of them in that moment. But I do think about them, because usually the stories, Hazel Road not so much, but a lot of the stories have been quite hard-hitting, you've asked people to talk about things that are difficult or relive moments that were difficult. And it's funny because a lot of people, they talk about these things, but you never hear yourself say it. And so actually that process of sitting down and hearing yourself is almost like you've heard it for the first time, and that can be really tricky. So yeah, I definitely think about them, but I never think about who, or I think you can't get bogged down in that because there are so many millions of people, like the BBC, 4.2 million people listen to each thing, but that could be like in the car with the volume turned down or at home, like really listening. So yeah, I don't think about that. I just do what I know how to do and hope I do it well. And then people like it, cool.
Het kan voor iemand confronterend en hard zijn als hij voor het eerst zijn eigen verhaal door de boksen hoort. Dus daarom zal Hana haar prioriteit altijd bij het personage zelf liggen. We hadden het in ons gesprek ook over stilte. In deze wereld vol prikkels is stilte zo goed als niet meer te vinden. Innerlijke stilte hoort samen met yoga voor haar. En ze legt zelf de link met hoe ze interviewt.
So I also teach yoga. That's like my little side hustle. And it's funny because I also disappear. And it's this kind of very parallel thing when you're kind of having a conversation with someone in a documentary and all of a sudden it's not about you and it doesn't matter who you are because it's about them. And I get the same thing when I do yoga or when I'm teaching yoga, that, an hour and a half can go by and I'm nowhere. And then all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, I'm back. And so that has that, I can just totally not be anywhere. And it's not silent as in there's no noise, but there's no like internal noise. There's nothing kind of distracting.
Okay, Hana, thank you very much for this interview.
Je luisterde naar de 4e aflevering van Ingezoomd. Ik had een boeiend gesprek met Hana Walker-Brown over de meerwaarde van muziek en oprecht interviewen. Ben je benieuwd naar de stukken die ze in elkaar knutselt? Leg je oor te luisteren op soundcloud.com/Walker_B. Daar vind je ook The Spirit of Hazel Road terug, waarmee ze dit jaar op de 3e plaats belandde op het Prix Europa Festival. Ook hier kan je nog blijven luisteren. De 5e aflevering is een gesprek met de Franse maker Rémi Dubowski-Douat, die het stuk My Indoctrinated Daughter maakte. Rémi ging 1 jaar lang bij zijn personages langs en verkreeg zo heel speciaal materiaal.
I learned a lot with this documentary. To be patient. If you spend a long time with someone, things are occurring on their own, and it's really lively.